cover and some really good guests who I want to make sure you hear from. So, I am Errol Louis. I am on the faculty here at the Graduate School of Journalism, and I am the political anchor at New York One News. And I'll be moderating our panel today. We're going to talk about how to cover local elections. And we are starting this specifically at a point and at an early enough time in the cycle that people can really take to heart and do some planning around some of the things that we're going to talk about today. We've got an hour and a half to go through this, and it's going to be a conversation with some experts and some friends of mine who are very, very good at this, and we're going to come at it from a number of different angles. Let me tell you how we're going to proceed. I'll introduce the panelists briefly, and then I'll invite each of them to talk for about 3 to 5 minutes about what some of the major issues are that they see confronting those of us who want to cover the elections and do a good job with it. And then there are some specific issue areas that, both in my capacity here as an instructor and in real life, as somebody who does a lot of this kind of journalism and have been for a number of decades now, there are some traps and some pitfalls and some challenges that always come up in local elections, and you really have to be aware of it in order to avoid it. The one thing I will say, and it'll come up again and again, is that this is going to, whether you're covering a city council race, whether you're trying to keep up with any of the citywide races, there's some judicial races, there's a district attorney's race that's going to be hotly contested out in Brooklyn. No matter what you're covering and what level you're covering it on, it's going to move really, really fast from now. We're basically 60 days out from the primary, and it's going to be confusing. It's going to be noisy, and you want to make sure, as journalists, that you have a solid plan in place. So if we don't leave you with anything else, please do know that it's coming fast. You got to have a plan. Even a bad plan is better than no plan. You don't want to get swept along by events. So I want to thank these folks for agreeing to come in and join us here. This event is sponsored by the Center for Community and Ethnic Media, which is an association of dozens of publications and is a sort of a leader when it comes to promoting this sector and doing enrichment sessions like this one to make sure we have a robust community and ethnic media presence alongside the mainstream media that often ignores some of our concerns in some of our neighborhoods. So you're going to hear from Dick Dadey to my immediate left, who is the executive director of the Citizens Union. Sitting next to him is Zenaida Mendez, the director of Manhattan Neighborhood Network El Barrio Firehouse Community Media Center. Next to her, Javier Castaño is here from Queens Latino. He may have a few issues laying around. Rong Xiaoqing is here from the Tao Daily. Next to her is Ben Max, the executive editor of the Gotham Gazette. And way down there, on the end, I get your order reversed, sorry. Ben Max is from the Gotham Gazette, and sitting next to him is Rong Xiaoqing. So now, folks, just talk a little bit about where you think the coverage needs to be. There are a lot of different things that are happening, and we'll get into individual districts, individual issues as we go along. But Dick, why don't you start us off? What should journalists be looking at as we head into what's essentially a 60-day sprint from now till the primaries?
I mean, I think this is going to be a very unusual election in that there are not that many, there's only 8 open seats within the city council. And so those are the really only competitive seats that we'll be seeing in the city council. City council is 51 members. And the ones that are held by incumbents there's no real strong challenge. There may be 1 or 2 districts where the incumbent may be seriously challenged. where there is an incumbent who's not able to stand for re-election as a result of term limits. We also are looking at a mayoral race that I don't recall ever having seen one where the incumbent is facing virtually no one within his or her own Democratic Party primary of any weight, and that it's going to be a bit of a snooze, at least during the September primaries for both the Republican and the Democratic nominees. And I don't remember, maybe Ed Koch's second term, there may have been there may have been very little Democratic competition within that primary. But I actually think the general election will be very spirited, because I think Namatakis, who will probably be the Republican nominee, is going to take on the mayor in a way that I don't even think they're prepared for. I think she's got a lot of spirit, a lot of energy. So it's really about competition, or the lack of competition that we see in what will be a very important and determined election of the future course of this, the future of the city over the next 4 years. And the fact that we don't have more competition among those who are holding the seats of incumbents and standing for election speaks to the fact that we have a strong campaign finance program that many incumbents are opting out of because they can raise more money and be prepared to fend off challenges. But also, a lot of the challenge, since they're term limited, people are not willing to take the time to raise a lot of money and lose. And so they kind of bide their time and wait until another opportunity when the incumbents step aside after what has been 12 years, but now will shortly be only 2 4-year terms for 8 terms. So it's the lack of competition, and whether the issues that the communities care about and want to have discussed will be sufficiently discussed among the candidates, because without much competition, there's not much of an incentive to talk about the issues that affect the communities in these communities.
Okay, thank you. Zenaida.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having us here. Well, I see it differently. As ethnic media, I think that we have a responsibility to cover our neighborhood in a way, maybe out of the cookie cutters everybody's mostly doing. We cannot just continue covering the neighborhood because of who has more money, who has more competition. I think that it's important that we remember that many of the people in our community are going for the first time in New York City. Therefore, it's important for them to know who is incumbent, what was the platform that they run, and if they have any challenges, definitely tell them who are the challenges. Because everything is they are learning the system, they are learning who's who, and that is critical. It's very, it's a lot to do in 8 weeks. It's a lot to cover in 8 weeks. It's a lot of things happening in 8 weeks. And as you know, the borough election did not do their homework. They didn't do enough out there to go in our community and inform the voters how they should vote and who's who. That's important. There's a lot of things happening in our community, from the rezoning to different issues in our neighborhood. We have a very big issue for me, which is that we have only 13 women in the city council, and only 4 of those women, 4 are term limited. How many? And 1 is asking us to run for 3rd term. That is critical. Gender balance at the city council is critical. There are about 35 women that are running for the city council. What are the platforms? How are they faring? To me, in our community, sometimes money is not an issue, because we can get a lot of volunteers if they understand the system, if they understand how to go about it. So as our ethnic media, we have a responsibility to go a little bit more beyond what the other media does, because our community are constantly changing. People are becoming U.S. citizens every day, and they're going for the first time. And like I said, some of the people running don't have enough to do mailing. Therefore, they depend on the media to inform them who's running. So it's a lot going on, but we have to go the extra mile as a ethnic media. And like Manhattan Neighborhood Network, we, in addition to do debates, we also do community profile. Because if our community don't know their community, they don't know what the needs are. They don't know what the community board recommending. So it's a lot that we need to go the extra mile to make sure that it's covered and that our community are informed.
Okay. Javier.
Hi.
is always look for local information, local news, local people, because we are because we represent the ethnic media, so we should really bring those issues, those local issues, to the table. Go really, really deep into the community, because we know the community and we should write about that. That's local. We are immigrants. That's the first suggestion. My second is be specific. When you ask the great majority of the politicians, what is your platform, they always say the same thing: education, overcrowded, immigration. No, just take one example in a specific school that is failing or something, or a specific teacher that is not doing that, and just taste that politician, if that politician really knows what he's talking about. Because anyone can come here and say, we protect immigrants, but the majority of them, they are not protecting anyone. So the third one is always look for a new angle. Always look for new information that can provide a new way, a new perspective of see things. If you go to a press conference and everybody's asking the same question or doing the same thing, just look for something different, always. And the last one is don't believe anything. Just check everything. See, they say, oh, no, but that candidate is going to win or that candidate is going to lose. You know? Don't believe that. Look what happened with Donald Trump. Yes, and so check everything. In journalism, we always say that if your mother said, I love you, you better check it out. So that's my advice.
Those are some great ones. I maybe have four as well. I think it's very different covering city council races and covering, let's say, a mayoral race. You know, there's different approaches there. So I'll talk, since we are talking a lot of community-based publications, mostly my comments, especially since the primary will have where most of the competition is in the city council races, my comments largely apply to covering those local races, but some of them will apply to the mayoral race here as well. One is sort of asking yourself and talking in your newsroom about what competition means, trying to decide what is a competitive race, how do we define that? To call an incumbent who has a challenger or two, even if it's the mayor in the Democratic primary right now who does have challengers, how do you decide what competitive means? And right along with that, how do you decide, who a valid candidate is? What are your metrics? What are you deciding as a publication, as a journalist, means a viable candidate? Does it mean a certain amount of fundraising? Does it mean a certain amount of media attention? Because a lot of times those are the two big things that people start to assume that a candidate is viable or not. And a lot of times it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, being very sort of paying attention to that, being very intentional about that, and the words you use about competition, about viability. A lot of that will also depend on if you're actually watching the candidate campaign. Try to go and see certain candidates, what are they doing? Asking their campaigns, what does this candidate's campaign schedule look like? There's a lot of candidates that don't put out campaign schedules. So you ask the campaign then, what is this candidate doing each day? What does this candidate's campaign schedule look like for this week? Some of the candidates are still working full-time. Some are working part-time. Some aren't working. Asking those questions, identifying those issues to decide who's really campaigning. I mean, to me, that's largely what makes a viable candidate more than almost anything else, is who's actually approaching it like they are a viable candidate. Do they believe themselves to be a viable candidate? So I think those are important conversations to have in your newsroom and on your own. And then, it's also about looking at sort of the establishment candidate, quote unquote establishment. Who's being put forward, whether it's an incumbent or not, as the sort of choice of the party machinery? And are you buying too much into that person as the inevitable winner? Or are you playing your role to check those candidates? The media, whether we decide that there's a competitive race or not, the media is an exceptionally important part of any race. And so writing off a race where there's no competition, even if there's literally no one else on the ballot against an incumbent, is an abdication of responsibility. Because in that instance, the media almost has to play the role of the opposition candidate. And that's not necessarily to say to fabricate opposition, but that's to be a check on the candidate and their record. Has an elected official been a good elected official? Have they represented their district? Have they been working hard? What's their voting record like? Showing that to their constituents in your publication is essential, not just writing off a race because there's no opponent. Even if your reporting isn't going to then lead to an opponent jumping into the mix because someone is a lazy elected official or has a voting record that doesn't really jive with their community, at least you're bringing that information to the public. And the other thing I'd say is getting interviews with the candidates, right? That's probably a goal that you have and you try for, but insisting on that. In a local race, the local candidates should be talking to you. You shouldn't settle for their representatives. You should talk to the candidates themselves, and you should have tough but fair questions ready for them based on their background, their record, their viewpoints, and what you know that their community needs or wants or has questions about, or big decisions facing the community, and asking them not just, hey, tell me who you are and what you want to do, and then regurgitating that to your readers or viewers, but asking them tougher questions about decisions they have to make and understanding, and Errol, I think, does this as well as anybody on his show when he has city council candidates, asking them if they actually know what the job of a city council member looks like and the things they have control over. Not just letting them talk about, let's say, Donald Trump and how they oppose his viewpoints.
Okay.
I'm gonna give you a general picture of this year's election from our perspective. I think in the ethnic field, the temperature we feel probably is different from the mainstream. As a panelist just mentioned, that in general, overall, there's not much competition this year, and there are only 8 open seats in the city council. But for us, we feel this is a really busy time and a very hot year for election. Normally in the summer, we would be like partly in the vacation mood, but this year, no. Right now, there's a candidate in our office being interviewed, and for the past few weeks, there have already been like 2 or 3 candidates visited us, and for the next few days, there are at least 3 more. So what happened? Why we're so busy? I'm going to tell you something about, from the local level first. You all know that there are 3 major Chinatowns in New York, right? Flushing, Manhattan Chinatown, and Sunset Park. So back in January, we did a story about how or why this year would be a very hard challenge for Margaret Chen to keep her seat. And we interviewed Margaret Chen. That was January, and she was like, "Oh, it's nothing. I don't worry at all." And those challengers, at that time there were only 1 challenger, I believe, and she didn't care at all. But things have changed, and now District 1 have 3 challengers against Margaret Chen, and District 20, which is Flushing. Back in January, there was only 1 incumbent city council member, Peter Koo. Nobody thought anyone would dare to stand up to challenge him. Oh, by the way, these are Margaret Chen and Peter Koo are all like 2 terms council members. So meaning like who have already hold their seat very tightly. But now there's Allison Tan, who is also Chinese and challenging Peter Koo. And Allison Tan is the wife of Rong Kim, Assembly Member Rong Kim. So that's Flushing. And Sunset Park, the district that's District 38. The incumbent is Carlos Menchaca. And there are 6 challengers now. Okay, so this 6 challengers, including some major elected officials, from assemblyman to former council member in that particular district, but also include one Chinese candidate. And that's a district with a large Chinese population. So you see the battle is really, really fierceful. And then on the city level, there might be some long shots. In the general perspective, you might thought these people are long shots, but these long shots, they think if they can grab some ethnic ballots, including the Chinese ones, they could have a chance. So they come to visit us, and they campaign in our district as well. So all of this add together, and this summer, no one can take a vacation, I guess.
Very true. Let's talk a little bit, folks, about the race for mayor. As Dick mentioned, Bill de Blasio is not facing any, in the Democratic primary, any well-funded or high-profile opponent. On the other hand, just as Ben Max pointed out, our duty as journalists does not end with sort of an assessment of whether or not the incumbent is likely to get reelected. That's one cut at a story, but that's really where the work just begins, right? I mean, do we then have a duty to sort of stand in and be the opposition that happens not to be there? To sort of press and challenge and look at different issues? Is that something folks up here are planning to do?
Sure. I mean, I said it, so I'll just follow up briefly. I mean, you know, we just published an article yesterday into today just looking at what de Blasio's 2 main Democratic primary challengers are saying. What are they running on? You know, he has a couple of guys, Sal Albanese and Robert Ganji, who are running in the Democratic primary. They're struggling a bit to raise money, to get attention. The Quinnipiac didn't even poll them in the last poll, but you know, they have critiques, they have platforms, they're most likely gonna be on the ballot, and they deserve some attention because, you know, I find it fascinating that sometimes you could get a group of, you know, 10 people outside of a mayor, the mayor's fundraiser, let's say, or outside of City Hall. You could have a group of 10 people protesting about something, and members of the media will write stories about it for 3 days. But then there's legitimate, you know, people with experience in public policy running for office, and they struggle to get anybody to pay attention to them, and I find that a bit contradictory. So, you know, it's essential to write about who's saying what, and obviously you have to have your standards, and you have to decide who's worthy of your inches, but it's important.
Yeah, and also the mayor is important, even though you might not think that he doesn't have the competition. He ran as a very progressive mayor. What are the policy and things that he legislated in the last 4 years? Have they been really progressive? For example, the rezoning in some of our neighborhood, how is that going to affect us? How is that going to affect the next generation that's coming after us? Are they going to be able to live in our neighborhood? These are things that we have to think about. How is the city going to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now? Those are the things that we have to start, you know, moving and examine whether that progressive stand is really progressive for us or not. How inclusive or exclusive it is, how we work with the city council, whether the budget, the impact of the budget. Right now, when we talk about, let's say, closing Rikers, okay, I'm for closing Rikers, but are we going to build other prisons? What is the budget for the other prison? Why do we need to build other prison? The board education budget. We need to look at that as the measure who mind the board education. We have the majority of students in the public school system, Black and Latino kids. How is that going to affect us? So it's a real issue that we need to really look into it.
And if we do it, those people running for the same seat as mayor might also have something to say, and our community has the right to know what are the counter proposition, what is the best for our communities. And they have the right to make that decision, which is critical. So examining what happened in the 4 years, and examining who's running, and then giving the fair share to everyone, giving the information out to our community, I think that is critical.
Take a little bit different tact as Citizens Union. I mean, we don't play the role of journalist so much as we play the role of evaluator, in that as an organization, as a good government organization focused on broad democratic reform, we focus more on the process of how our democracy operates, how our government is run. And we are the publisher for Gotham Gazette, and they focus on a much broader array of issues. We don't focus so much on issues like the environment or traffic or transportation or education. We focus on the process by which those decisions are being made. And so we had actually started Citizens Union 120 years ago as a political party, believe it or not, and helped elect the first reform mayor in the city of New York in 1901, Seth Low, for whom the Low Library at Columbia is named. And that was to basically fight back against the corruption of Tammany Hall in the affairs of the city. And look at, we're talking about corruption in the affairs of the city, and look what happened with Shelley Silver today. The court overturned his conviction on corruption. Quite ironic. But we switched from being a party to being a civic association that continued to evaluate candidates for the purposes of providing New Yorkers with unbiased, independent information that wasn't driven by agendas or issues, but rather by how these candidates and these elected officials could be held accountable to the promises that they may have made as candidates, but also to the way in which they would assume the office for which they are taking, for which they become elected and become responsible. And so ours is, we have a whole process within the organization. We invite people to participate as members of the organization. I think we've got like 75 people over the next 2 months that are going out and meeting with all of the candidates and teams, interviewing them against a set of criteria that is not so much set in stone, but rather subjective analysis, contextual analysis of the race and how things may be playing out within the individual neighborhoods, and how people are connecting with their constituents. If we're looking at elected officials that are running for re-election, we compare them to what they said 4 years ago. What promises did they make to their constituents and to the voters? Have they honored those commitments? And what are their ideas going forward in the next 4 years? And how do they make these decisions with integrity? Do they try and fight for a government that is fair? Do they try and fight for a democracy that is open and inclusive of all, that listens to each and every voice? Or do they listen to the one who's got the biggest checkbook, or to the outsized influence? I mean, we're very much concerned with seeing that we elect candidates who live up to this idea of what a democracy is really about, being all-inclusive and valuing every voter and engaging every New Yorker and listening to every voice. That is what we are driven by in our evaluation of these candidates. And we do it, so we actually, we play a little bit of the opposition, but we actually try and provide information to the New Yorkers along with a recommendation and why we're making that specific recommendation against a set of criteria. And that they can use that for the purposes of making their own decisions.
And let me just mention, I mean, you will find as you get out there that you are the dominant media player in whatever race you're covering. You'll also find, up to a surprisingly high level, like even if you're talking about the race for public advocate, which apparently there is a primary challenger to Tish James. I think I just learned this yesterday. You'll find that you have a ton of information, and you're very familiar, just in the course of your ordinary neighborhood and community reporting, you're aware of different issues, different controversies, land use questions, problems at a particular school, allegations at least of problems at a particular school, discrepancies between what was promised by some unit of the administration and what actually appears to be happening. You'll find pretty quickly that you know more than the opposition that's out there. I mean, I've known Sal Albanese and Bob Ganji for a long, long time. they know what they know. They have particular issues that they're sort of aiming at the mayor, but that's not necessarily the main issue happening in your neighborhood. It's not necessarily the main issue that people care about all over the city. You know, so it would be negligent of us to simply rely on whatever these two candidates or any other candidates happen to bring forward. We really do have an obligation to affirmatively bring forward, hey, there's a big discrepancy between what the mayor promised and what's happening at, you know, Boys and Girls High School. Or the road that was supposed to get reworked, the traffic pattern that was supposed to be reworked, never got done. They told us it would get done, it never got done. There's a wealth of information in the mayor's management report where you can find the mayor, the city's own standards for what it wanted to accomplish, agency by agency, dollar by dollar, and you can pretty easily sort of start to find where there may be some gaps or at least some questions. You can go out and ask some questions. So, yeah, it's nice to think, and in many cases, in a spirited race, you will be sort of the referee, calling fouls and, you know, kind of keeping track of the race and trying to make sure everybody stays honest. But in a lot of other cases, you're gonna end up being, if we wanna switch the metaphor, the judge in a case, where the judge will sort of make sure certain evidence is kept out and other evidence is brought in, and make sure that a solid, clean, accurate, informative record is created, so that the voters will be able to make their decision based on something other than a bunch of slogans and bumper stickers and gossip passing through the neighborhood. Folks, let's talk about some specific races. There are these open council seats, but that's really not the end of it, right? I mean, it's a handful of open council seats. There's this primary for Brooklyn District Attorney. There's some judicial contest that's going on in Brooklyn where there's a slate of 6 civil court judges running against another slate of 6 civil court judges for 6 open slots. What are some local races that you are paying attention to? And what are the issues, the personalities, the politics in those districts? Javier,
Okay.
yes.
Let me start. I'm from Queens, and my publication is Queens Latino, and probably this year is the most fascinating competition there, because the incumbent Julissa Ferreras decided not to run. That's the first question mark. Why he decided not to run? So you heard that her father had some problems, and she said that I need to take care of my family, things like that. But that's not important anymore, at least from this point of view of what we are talking about. But then 5 candidates are now fighting to get the seat of Julissa Ferreras. And I believe was last night, the last day to collect the signatures and to present those signatures. I heard that all of them passed the 450 signatures they have to collect. Let's see now, they are being challenged by that. And the party, the Democratic Party, has a candidate. There is the Assemblyman Francisco Moya. He was elected in 2013. And he is not well known in the Latino community. He has to work with that. And he is, let's say, connected to corporations and businesses. And there is another candidate that is well connected to the community, that is Iran Monserrate, who went to prison for 2 years for stealing money when he was the senator there. And he's the same one who cut the face of the girlfriend. But he's strong in the community, very strong. And then you have another 3 candidates. One is Cristina Furlong. She's like an activist in the community, we used to work for an organization called Make the Road New York. She is a mother of a child in school. And you have Erika Montoya. She used to work for Iron Monserrate. And she's young, she's like 31 years old. And then you have Jonelle Letelier, who used to be the chief of staff of Senator Jose Peralta. I have the feeling that the competition is going to be between Iron Montserrat and Francisco Moya. And we are going to sponsor some debates there. And it's an important seat. That district is District 21, and it has 164,000 residents, and 111,000 of them are Latinos. So the great majority are Latinos. Only around 70,000 are blacks, and like 10,000 are Asian. So the competition there is strong, and the issues, Willis Point is one, affordable housing is two, the bid on the Roosevelt Avenue is another important issue, and we are going to debate those issues in the near future.
Hey, to what extent is the fact that Montserrat stole money and went to prison an issue in that race? Are the other candidates raising that as a sign of his lack of fitness for office?
Yes, I guess the real competition hasn't started yet. But yes, you heard Francisco Moya talking about, oh, he's a criminal. And Monserrate is defending himself, saying, I already paid 2 years, and I can be the candidate, and I know the issues, and I always represent the community, the Latinos, or whoever it is. Yes, so it's a big issue. I believe he's going to confront a lot of women organizations. Francisco Moya and Iron Montserrat already faced each other a few years ago. And I remember that Francisco Moya, when he was a candidate against Monserrate, he brought all the Democratic Party, and especially Nidia Velázquez, the congresswoman, congresswoman, and all women to defend him. So I believe he's going to do the same, and he's going to have a press conference against Monserrate, and he's going to portray him as a criminal, as a guy who beat his girlfriend, and all that stuff, yes. But I guess Monserrate already have the answer for that.
I think for us, the Brooklyn DA, that election is quite interesting because you all know the Peter Liang case, and the late DA Thompson was the one who handled the Peter Liang case. And then also Vincent Gentili, who is the current council member and running for that seat, visited us last week. I think it was either last week or the week before. And he, among the 6 candidates of that seat, Gentili is the only one who has a formal Chinese name. So he has a good advantage with us, with the community. But still, when he sat down with us, we had to press him on the Peter Liang case. And it was so funny. I wish I could show you the video of that cat and mouse game that we had to go through with him. And he tried to avoid that question, and he tried to answer with some vague answer. But eventually, we had to say that, council member, you won't be able to walk out of this room before you really gave us the answer. That how would you have dealt with the Peter Liang case? So. But still, he gave a very cunning answer. He said, "Oh, I didn't have all the evidence. I didn't really look through, but he did say that the DA didn't do a great job, and there were some things that the DA could do better." So things like that. But also, I want to go back to what we touched a little bit just now about issues versus sort of like a cat fighting. On the local level, the elections a lot of times are catfighting. There are issues like, in District 1 in Chinatown, land using is a big issue. But still, do we cover the catfighting? That's our judgment. Normally, we do. Because one, catfighting sell newspapers, but also there is a real reason behind that, because in the ethnic community we need to do voters education. We need to really stir up the heat so that voters can go out to cast their ballots. Anything you could get their attention or get their interest in the current election. I think that's for us is a part of the public service. So, like in District 1, when the mayor went to Chinatown at the end of June and held this town hall meeting with Councilmember Margaret Chin, and then there were some complaints that the mayor dispatched so many police officers and confiscated the flyers of some candidates. So we reported on this, and Daily News and DNA Info, several media outlets covered this. And the mayor's office, of course, didn't really answer our questions, and they referred us to the law department, and the law department didn't answer our phone call. But anyway, yesterday, the mayor went to Chinatown again to announce that rat reduction program. So in the Q&A, we asked him the question about the flyer issue. So the mayor tried to avoid us and didn't call us for the question until the very last, that he couldn't really avoid anymore. And then he said, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about." And then I was like, "Yeah, but Mayor, it has been covered by the media." And he said, "Oh yeah, there are so many things covered by the media. I don't have to know everything." I'm like, okay. So we write a story, and with the direct quotes from the mayor. Everyone could have their own judgment. So things like that, I mean, it's not serious issue. It's just maybe the election year fuzz. But for our readers, I mean, anything that can get their attention on this election, I think is good.
Wrong. Explain, when you say Vincent Gentili was the only one of the DA candidates to have a formal Chinese name.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by this, right? Because you can create a character for your name.
That's true. Yeah.
And it can be, your trusted friend or some other kind of alias, right?
Yeah. So Gentili, when he ran for council member, he campaigned in our community. So that's, at that time, we gave him a formal Chinese name. And he said even today that when he went to the supermarkets or he was bumped into by some voters on the street, Chinese voters, they call him directly with his Chinese name. So after like so many years, that name has already been in people's mind. So
you picked those names? I thought it was the candidates who did that.
No, well, at that time, normally these names is like the Chinese news. They adopted it from the Chinese newspapers.
Uh-huh.
And some candidates pick it by themselves. Those are candidates who don't have a formal Chinese name until the last minute. So they gave themselves a Chinese name, and then that's the name they printed on the ballots, but nobody recognized it. That's really a big no-no.
Interesting.
I'll say a couple things that we're looking at Gotham Gazette. Again, we're not a community paper. We look citywide, and we go into different neighborhoods and communities to try to report on local races. But we try to give certainly a citywide view of things. And Gotham Gazette, long before I got there 3 years ago, has been a great resource for election guides and known as a place to look for election guides for candidates all across the city, and as part of the Citizens Union Foundation mission for informing voters. But a couple of themes that we've looked at and will continue to look at are something Zenaida hit on in her opening comments, which is the number of women in the city council, which is very low at about 14, and sort of under threat to get down to lower, 10, 9, 8 out of 51, which is really incredible and troubling to anybody that wants to see some semblance of sort of representative democracy, even though obviously gender, race, ethnicity is not the end in itself. You know, you want your representative bodies to have some semblance of that. So we're looking at that theme a little bit, and something that ties into that theme is another one, which is state legislators running for city council. In several of the open seats for city council where members are term limited out, there are state assembly members or state senators running for those city council seats. They want to leave Albany, they want to make a lot more money because the salary is a lot higher at the city council. And so you have several instances where those actually converge, where there are qualified female candidates running in these seats facing male state legislators looking to come from Albany and take those city council seats. So those are fascinating dynamics. Nothing I said there means that the female candidate is necessarily the better candidate. I think these are just important, interesting themes to note. And when you have state legislators running for city council seats or for mayor, which you have in the case of Nicole Maliatakis, an assembly member, you have a clear public service record to look at and evaluate. You have a voting record, you have a policy agenda, you have constituent services to evaluate if you do good reporting. So those are a couple of themes there, and they tie in with something I mentioned before, which is this idea of who's the establishment candidate, who's the county party machinery backing. And if there's anybody you're going to be sort of especially skeptical of in an election season, it should be those candidates that have all that sort of machinery behind them right from the start, and asking, do they deserve that kind of support? Why are they getting it? Have they been independent-minded? Have they been a voice for reform, or have they sort of just gone along with politics as usual?
And, following up on that, I mean, the council that was elected in 2013 for the first time pretty much mirrored the demographic makeup of our city in terms of ethnicity and race for the first time in its history. But as you look at, you dig down a little deeper, as some of my colleagues up here have pointed out, it's still a pretty insular group of people running. I mean, if you look at some of the challengers in open seats or some of the people who have come forward, it's the chief of staff that's the front runner to the elected official who's stepping down. Or it's, I mean, Hiram Montserrat, didn't he, I thought he was long gone. You know,
Me too.
and he has a way of coming back, and he's kind of like the Donald Trump of New York City politics, in that no matter what he does, he still has a core group of people who are going to stand behind him and support him. And so it's just, even though there is, you know, we've seen a more diverse council being elected as a result, I think, of the campaign finance program that we have in the city, still there's a very insular group of candidates who run, who are the perpetual candidates, or they are connected in some way to the elected official, or you know, have been there before. I mean, you see, you know, the seat swapping. I mean, Inez Dickens, who is a member of the city council, last year ran for the seat, the seat to which Keith Wright's seat. Do you know who was in the Democratic Party primary? Keith Wright had held the seat for 22 years. You know who held who her competition was in that Democratic Party primary? Nobody. She had no competition. It had been cleared. She had one nominal Republican challenger in the general election. It was like the seat was given to her. This is after 22 years of being held by Keith Wright, who did a very good job. Why wasn't there more people out there running? It's a very insular system that still, I think, is very. I mean, I admire those people who step forward and want to challenge. And I think that the reporting that needs to take place this fall, in particular, is to kind of take a look at the lack of competition, but actually who's running and how difficult it is to actually mount a campaign, even though there is this campaign finance program, because it's a very insular party, still a very Tammany Hall party-driven system. I mean, in Queens, it's a diverse delegation for the most part, but it's handpicked by the county leaders. It's not a true democracy. It gives the illusion of being a very representative democracy, but it's all determined well in advance before you even get to the polling place.
And it should not be that way. In most of this district, you have 50,000 people registered to vote, and then people win with 2,000 votes, with 1,500 votes. So we have to examine why is that? What is it that the candidates or the party is providing the people are not that happy and going out there to vote? That is critical. I mean, most of these seats are won by, 1,000 votes, 1,500, and like I said, it is incredible. And it's basically one, a lot of people are afraid to run because they can ruin your reputation in 3 minutes after you work 30 years, as an activist or whatever. But we have also let's say, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, we focus in Manhattan. Right now, I think that's, Melissa Margarito, the speaker, is term limited, so there is a lot of competition in District 8 for that seat. Rosie Mendez is also term limited. It's a lot of competition down there. I think it's about 4 or 5 women running for that seat. So we have other very important district. District 4 is very important. And I have to say in Queens, I grew up in Corona, Queens. District 20, 21, they will be discussed. I always thought that Harry Montserrat, which I refuse to say his name for many years, was basically sent to jail for what he did to his girlfriend.
Oh.
Oh no, at the end he wasn't, but what I'm saying is play a very big role. There are 3 women running. We also had to take in effect, Harvey is Puerto Ricans, Moya is Ecuadorian. We have a large Ecuadorian community raised into both and growing in Queens. So even though we don't want to make a fight between ethnic Latinos group, but that is the fact. So things of that sort are happening in the Bronx. We have someone challenges Cabrera's seat, a couple of people, Reverend Cabrera. So there are, things are really happening. I'm very happy to see more young people running for office and daring to challenge. That is important. We have to think the new generation. Just like Dick mentioned, most of these people have been there 20, 30 years. And then they still stand that the district still being the poorest in New York City. How can you be the poorest when you've been there for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? What is going on? But it's basically we need to focus on the issue, not so much on the candidates. It's dealing with both. So there are many issues that affect our community that they don't know how to handle it, how to go about it, examine it, the incumbent, whoever is sitting there. So the next time, it's 4 years, for the assembly it's 2 years, but 4 years go pretty quick. And it's basically 2 years and nothing, but by the 3rd year, everybody's campaigning. Everybody's thinking whether they're going to stay or not. So it's important. There are many groups that are doing political training, trying to encourage to bring more diversity to that pool, for people to learn more about the system, because that's the other thing is, you have people who come from other countries that the system is completely different than here, so they have to relearn. And the acting media thinks we have to repeat and not get tired of repeating how the system works. Today, they will get it one day. But it's like only the last 2 or 3 months of the race that you hear how the system works. Today is an important day. It's the deadline to file your petition. So some of these candidates might not make it. Some of these candidates might be challenged. So that's important. From today on is when the real competition for the election start, because they all have to submit their signature. So that's important. And who signed, that's a system that is important for our community to know. You see people in the corner asking for people to sign. They might not be registered voter, and they have to learn about that. When people knock on the door, to open the door for people to sign for those petitions. So it's a whole system that we also have to, prior to the election, prior to the primary, do something to make sure that the people know how the system works. If everybody be out there, and you're going to get people knocking on the door that you don't know, but because they had the list of who's registered to vote, the Republican or Democrat, and those are the good signature, the one that you get door by door, not the one that you get in the street. So those are things that help for people to be out there and to be willing to participate in the system, so that we can stop having this little insular system of 2 or 3 people dominating. And I always say I have done a lot of coverage of political. I myself have worked for 2 elected officials And I said, when you have good volunteer in the neighborhood, sometimes you don't need that much money. But usually, the press focus on how much money the person have, not about the issues. But sometimes, yes, we done election that is the virtue of going to public housing and educating the people living in public housing, the issue with public housing. Those people out there go out and vote, and that person who's going to do something public housing win, without having a lot of money. But because we have educated the public to know how it works.
As you say that, Zenaida, well, I'm thinking, one way to think of this, and one goal everybody should have is you and your publication should have at least as much credibility as the candidates by the time this is over. Meaning you should be as much in everybody's consciousness, bringing information and making sure that they know about the process. As far as process goes, and I can work this out with Karen and Jahangir, something we do at New York One is we start various countdowns, including probably the most important one right now is if you want to vote in the primary in September, there's a deadline by which you have to register. I don't know offhand when that is, but once we have it,
It's August 14th.
we will ask all of you to join us in pounding that message out to make sure that people know. Because there's nothing worse than the race finally igniting, people finally tuning in, Labor Day comes, we're down to the wire, and then folks discover, oh, you can't vote in the primary. And that's by design, it's not an accident, but we're the answer to that, so we should do that. Let me mention the Brooklyn DA's race, and then we'll broaden the conversation and you all can join in and ask questions. The Brooklyn DA's race I'm paying attention to, not just because I live in Brooklyn, but because, and not just because the late DA Ken Thompson was a personal friend of mine. You all remember, I know some of you were there, when we had him in for our Newsmakers series. He was sitting right here. And he really did some extraordinary things with the office, none more extraordinary than the couple of dozen exonerations of wrongfully convicted people. What's been interesting in that race, and there are at least a half a dozen people running, is that most of the people running also worked in the Brooklyn DA's office. And some worked there for decades, including the very years when a lot of these false convictions were taking place. The way I think about it is it's sort of the battle of the bureaus, because they all come from different parts of that same office. There's 1,200 people in the DA's office. So Eric Gonzalez, who is running, has been there for decades. And he was Ken's choice to stand in for him when Ken Thompson went in for surgery or for medical treatment from which he never recovered. And Eric Gonzalez he has the sort of the powers of incumbency to a certain extent. He's been backed by Ken Thompson's widow and a number of other elected officials and union members. Ann Zwern is running. Ann Zwern used to be the number 2 to Charles Hines, who was there for a long, long time, 26 years, I think, in the end, was his the amount of time he spent there. And Ken Thompson beat him. So Ann Zwern is running. Pat Gatling, who was another one of the high-ranking, I think she ran the Narcotics Bureau for a time there in the Brooklyn DA's office. Amadou Jumeau is running. She now works for the Brooklyn Borough President, but she also started the Crimes Against Children Bureau. It was really path-breaking. So when you'd read about some of these really horrible, horrible cases where children had been terribly abused or even killed, Amadou Jumeau was the prosecutor in those cases. She is running. Mark Fleedner, who worked under Ken Thompson, actually left because he disagreed with the handling of the Peter Lang case, and he is running as well. And then Vincent Gentili, you already heard about. So it's an interesting race. I'm getting information, and we're going to end up reporting a lot of this about Joe Hines, the former DA, sort of playing a role behind the scenes. He's concerned about his legacy. He's concerned that people like me are always reminding folks of the dozens of wrongfully convicted people on his watch that led to his being voted out as Brooklyn DA. The first time a sitting DA, I think, was voted out in a primary in over a century. I think it was 105 years ago was the last time it happened. He's concerned about his legacy. He wants his various former bureau chiefs to kind of stick up for him and not bash him so much. And so it creates an odd dynamic because all of these folks are saying, you know, we revere and we honor and we want to extend the work of Ken Thompson. And then they're also kind of being given an incentive to sort of try and rehabilitate Joe Hines or not talk too bad about him. And the question I ask each of them is, you know, when all of these wrongful convictions were taking place, where were you? What did you know? Why didn't you stop it? You know, and they all have interest. The answers have been very interesting, or at least one of them said, hey, that was all happening on the 19th floor. I worked in a whole different area, you know, like, not my problem.
Errol, you know, when Vincent Gentili went to our office, he actually mentioned this. He was like, you know, all the other candidates, they worked under Hines, except for me. So it was like working for Hines is kind of like a black point on your resume now.
Yeah, yeah. And it was interesting, too, because I've known Vinny Gentili for years. I didn't even realize he was an attorney, you know. But, no, I mean, seriously, he was in the state senate, and he's been in the city council, and you add it up, it's like 20 plus years, I think, in public service. I didn't realize he was an attorney.
So, I mean, Errol hits on a good point here about the Brooklyn district attorney race. I mean, and others have mentioned this. The turnout in the primaries in September is going to be very low. That's a fact. How low depends on a lot of things, including some of our coverage, I hope, and some of the things that others have just talked about in terms of getting information out there about the process, starting with the fact that there's a primary day in September. In 2013, in a very crowded Democratic primary for mayor, there were under 700,000 votes. In a city of 8.5 million, and you know, most of the registered voters are Democrats in New York City. It was incredibly low, and there was a ton of attention on the race. So that's frustrating and challenging, and there's things that Citizens Union and others are doing to change the electoral process and engage more people, and we're all trying to engage more people. But this Brooklyn DA's race, which is incredibly important, is going to be decided by a very small number of voters, and everything that we can do to get the word out about this race, along with all these city council races, is extremely important.
I mean, to that point, just not just covering the candidates, but covering the process of how our elections are conducted. It's just New York State has what we've called now is a passive voter suppression state. You know, we look at all the other states, you know, who have tried to suppress certain blocks of individuals from voting, like North Carolina. You know, they lowered it in 2016 from 7 days of early voting to 5 days of early voting. There was a big uproar. Well, we don't even have early voting in New York State, and it takes, you know, I mean, all the things that are in place to basically prevent the voter from voting and to produce these low turnout elections is something else that we should actually take a look at and put pressure on to make these changes, whether it's this constitutional convention that's coming up or you know, through the legislature. But it's pathetic that we have one of the lowest voter turnout rates in this country. New York State ranks in the bottom 5% of all states in voter turnout. You know, the for the state legislature last year, we had 1 out of 4 state legislators run for re-election without any competition in the September primary or the general election. 25% of the incumbents that ran for re-election, all they had to do is say, I want to run again, and they were elected. It's horrible. And I think it does have an effect on candidates, how they approach the race, because if it's going to be a low turnout, they're not going to feel that they're going to have much accountability to the voters that put them in, because it's going to be a very small segment of voters, and they know who they are and who they're going to pay attention to and who they're not going to pay attention to.
I just want to add something in this regard, something that Queens Latino is trying to do for the last 3 years. We all know that this is a democratic city. This is the strongest party. But at the same time, that party is taking the voters, and especially the Latino voters, for granted. And look what happened this morning with Silver, who is the assemblyman who was sentenced to, I believe, 9 years in prison, and now a judge decided he's not going to prison. So what I'm trying to do, or our paper is trying to do, is to open the pages of our publication to the Republican Party and create a dialogue and bring another perspective. because we identify that all the politicians out there pretty much are the same, and they talk about the same things, that helping the small businesses and the immigrants, and they're pretty the same. So we are trying to do to open those pages to the Republican Party. We invite columnists. We said you can even advertise almost free, and they basically they get really enthusiastic, but they refuse. They never take a step up to communicate with the Latino voters.
Do people know
Good point.
how many, I mean, to that point, is how many Republican Party primaries are going to be this fall for the city council? We count 2 at the moment. On the east side, District 4, and the Vincent Gentili seat. There are actually some competitive Republican primaries. It's just pathetic that in a city, with as many Republicans, registered Republicans as there are so few Republican Party primaries, which is why, I mean, not to make a point of this, but we should be having nonpartisan elections where people, you vote for the candidates and you have opening up much more to candidates running, and you have much more competition, as opposed to restricting it to the parties that actually depress turnout.
It is certainly worth noting, to follow up on what Javier said, is that you have Nicole Malliotakis, who is the daughter of Greek and Cuban immigrants. You have a Latina running for mayor on the Republican Party line. You have Michael Faulkner, former Jets football player, black preacher from Harlem, who's running for city controller. And you have J.C. Polanco from the Bronx, Dominican American immigrant, who was running for public advocate. So there is room, if you want to take the Republicans seriously, to sort of surface a lot of the different issues.
Rocky de la Fuente.
Oh, that's true. Rocky de la Fuente, who just moved here from California.
From Mexico.
I think I'm going to interview him soon.
Oh, no, he's a Democrat now, right?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
No,
no, he's
Republican.
He
Republican.
changed.
Republican.
He recently changed the party.
He used to
from-
be Democrat. Not now.
Oh, okay. So
He's
he changed
Republican.
to Republican. Okay.
Yeah. He's trying to. He has to be elected like Bloomberg.
So
Okay.
I think, I don't know if how many people in the room here have heard of Rocky de la Fuente, but I think this is sort of interesting is, as Errol just said, someone who just moved to New York, apparently ran for president as a Democrat, moved to New York, is registered as a Republican, and is running for mayor. I mean, these are sort of the interesting types of characters and candidates that newsrooms have decisions about. Is someone with very little experience in New York City and background in New York government and public policy someone worth taking seriously as a candidate for mayor? Going back to sort of something I said at the beginning, these are important decisions. If someone's name is going to be on the ballot, that's a certain level of legitimacy there.
Oh, yeah, I just want to share a little detail, a funny detail with about Rocky de la Fuente. He went to our office too, and so we figured that he is not really a New Yorker. It sounds like he spent quite a lot of time outside of New York. So we asked him like, how long have you been in New York? And he tried to say, my son has been here, my son living here for like 3 years. My ex-wife has been living here for, we're like, no, you yourself. How long have you been in the city? And so eventually he said 400 days. And then so we asked him, what do you think about the admission policy of specialized high school? And he said, I don't know what you mean by specialized, but I have a son who's bipolar. I sent him to a public school. Yeah.
This also goes back to Paul Massey, who was running in the Republican primary and dropped out. There's people who have aspirations for office, whether it's mayor or city council or else otherwise, but our job is not just to ask them, do you think there should be more affordable housing, right? Because you'll hear every candidate say, I'm going to fight for more affordable housing and better education and better schools,
streets.
and everybody's got the same 6 things that would improve life. Sure, great. But do they understand how city government works? You know, do they know the size of the budget within, you know, you don't want to play gotcha with like factoid questions that anybody can easily sort of Google, but you want to find out if people have any clue about how city government and public policy works in New York.
I
A little
think that
gotcha, never heard anybody.
the
Sir.
judicial system, we should discuss that, is very, very important in our communities, because like I just started jury duty a month ago, and it's like, I would say 65% of the people in front of the judges are Latinos and African American and others, and all the judges are, you know, Anglo. This is important. They don't understand the system. So this is critical for us, you know, for people to understand how what role do they play, and what's happening now. It is also important. It is important for the Democratic Party to nominate the judges, or it's important that we vote for the judges. How, you know, all these little things affect in our community a lot, especially for the young people who do not know the system, do not understand how the system works, and it's no joke. You know, this is, once you have anything in your record, you're not going to be able to go to college. You know, or you're going to be able to go to college, but you have to pay for it. You're not going to get financial aid. So this is what we're talking about. So that is critical.
Yeah, no, it really is true, and you know, at some point it's almost offensive in some cases when you have candidates who step forward and you realize that they don't know anything, they haven't done any homework at all, you know, and it would be like going into a private sector company and saying, I want to run this division of the company, and you ask them, well, do you know what revenues were last year? No. Do you know how many employees there are? No. You know, do you know what the company makes? Kind of. We would never put up with that. But, you know, democracy, there's not a lot of rules when it comes to this. Sir?
I was just going to also add that a lot of voters have no idea about the difference between state government and city government. You have, I'm curious, you know, in my district, 38, how many of the other candidates understand the difference between what really the city council does, and that's really actually what we do with the debate. That's what I kind of want to find out from some of the other candidates.
Yeah.
Do you understand what you could possibly do and what is out of your hands?
And that, I mean, that is really stuff you have to say to your audience. I mean, you do that, not anybody else. I take pains to do it when I'm moderating a debate, but you can do it before, you can have a stock piece that you run every other time you check in on a race. Say, the city council, you know, the city council member from District 38 is one of 51 members. They select a speaker, they have land use powers, they vote on the budget, they do this, they do that. You know, make sure everybody understands that, because the candidates will promise the moon. You know, they'll say, we're gonna make revolution, you know, we're gonna put a chicken in every pot, you know, and I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff that has nothing to do with the job, right? We're gonna fight for the death penalty, you know, it's like, huh? You know, we're gonna stop Donald Trump, you know? Sir?
So this has been indirectly answered, I think, but I'm curious what the panelists think first. I'm curious how the media responds to candidates like the mayor and others who say, you don't report what the people, what real voters, what real people care about. You know, I go to town halls, people ask questions about all these issues that you don't report. You report on the gotcha stuff, you report on the scandal, like you were saying, you sell papers. So how do you respond to that? Do you just ignore it and say, you know, of course, the candidate's going to say that they're blown off? Do you do issue polling and get a sense of what, you know, real people are thinking about and follow that? And if you do, when you make your decision, do you publicly respond to the candidate saying that? Or is it just, you know, internal and you're going to go your own way and take it from there? Or an arrow?
Well, I can tell you my answer is, you know, I take it you saw the mayor sort of hit me with some of that stuff. You know, we often commission polls, and for one of the upcoming polls, when the memo went around saying, hey, what questions do you want included in the poll? I was like, okay, you know what, let's get some of these in here, so maybe we can get a little bit of objective fact. I mean, the reality is, though, and I come to this with, you know, I have devoted my life to this profession, you know, and I think we probably all need to maybe carry ourselves with a little bit more swagger, you know, like, when I started in journalism, I used to sit on the steps and watch Ed Koch go in and out of the building. You know, mayors come and go, and we stay. You know, so any given politician can think that because they had a good day on an election day 4 years ago, that they're tuned in to the city in the way that the rest of us are not. But, you know, collectively, this panel alone is a couple of centuries worth of experience of all kinds in activism and journalism and, you know, deep knowledge of communities. And I would put their knowledge up against any politician in the city, you know. So, I mean, you know, so, I mean, it's just objectively true, right? So I let that stuff go right past me when they say, oh, you guys don't, you know, any given story, yeah, it's more or less interesting, more or less relevant. You know, we can all debate about it. That's the wonderful thing about free speech. But if we're doing our job right, you know, when I hear that from, I won't say just the mayor, because a lot of people say it, including the president. When they say it, it's because we're focusing on something they'd rather us not talk about, which is my, you know, that's your cue to step on the gas and do another couple of stories.
It's true.
I
I mean,
just-
once Bill de Blasio, you know, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Poble Ace, say, oh, Poble Ace, who watched that? Well, basically because the community own Poble Aces. The community run the show. The community go out there and talk. And he doesn't want to see that. I mean, we have a great show called Community Cap, which is incredible. You know, we go live at 5 o'clock on Tuesday. I bet you that he's not going to watch that show. you know. So this is how they want to dismiss what the people are saying versus what they want us to say.
For us, it's like, I can't imagine the mayor say that to us. It never happened. Maybe because like we're not above his radar, but I think that would be a mistake. As Errol said, you know, we have a lot of readers and means a lot of ballots. But on the other hand, we do cover a lot of things the mayor want us to cover and the mainstream media don't even cover. You know, like the informative pieces we do, like, you know, the mayor, you know, in last year, the administration has filled so and so how many potholes. You know, we wrote those stories. We're really good public servants. You know, partly because we have to educate our readers and also have to provide them all sorts of information. And they rely on us. A lot of our readers don't even read English. So we're their sole source of information of this city.
You know, one of the things that is part of the critique that you're mentioning, Steve, is, you know, the mayor thinks that there's not enough good news. It's not just that a lot of the coverage is sort of superfluous, you know, silly scandal, as opposed to more substantive things, but he doesn't think there's enough of the good news being reported on. And I think that's also another, you know, the difference between sort of doing public relations and doing journalism is a pretty big difference, right? So I think, you know, we all sort of have a sense of that, and that's important. But there are, again, decisions for you as a journalist and for newsrooms to make about coverage of sort of the nicer stories that show progress under an administration. At Gotham Gazette, you know, we don't do a lot of day in, day out stories of sort of like, oh, they announced today this or they announced today that. So we almost always have something that's a little bit tougher for elected officials, and I prefer that, but it also does make you think sometimes about the balance in your coverage, and it's not supposed to be, oh, one good story, one tough story, but, you know, you do have to think a lot about, are we servicing readers in the right way by acknowledging some of the progress that's being made? And I think when he asked those questions, I think about that sometimes. I think about it for me, and I think about it for the industry.
And you guys know, I mean, we've had, I don't know how many newsmakers through here, right? I mean, every obscure commissioner, we've had commissioners from small business services and the buildings department, and, you know, and we give them a full hour and let them explain to us what they're doing and why, you know? I mean, there's a lot to this, and, you know, any given complaint, like I said, might or might not be valid, but as long as people are conducting themselves professionally and, you know, doing the work week in and week out, the complaints, you know, those also kind of come and go. You know, it's like, just write a letter to the editor and we'll just move on. Yeah.
I just also have to say, yes, I think you're credible when you criticize something not being done or your readers not being listened to by politicians, as long as you also recognize when the reverse happens. And in our district, there have been a number of victories that we've had where the councilman has been on our side. We've gotten what we wanted, for one thing, the ferry location. Things like that, and we put that in the paper, and that way nobody can say that we were one-sided.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, it's a weird thing to say because I've done political journalism for so long, but you know, in many cases, I get offended when people suggest that I would care so much about the outcome of any one race that I would try and put a thumb on the scale. It's like, well, you know, I mean, whoever wins or whoever loses, the issues remain, the community remains. You're gonna have to do the same amount of work. You don't get any extra money if one candidate wins or the other. It's just, it's an,
Quick point. Hiram Monserrate, Larry Seabrooks of the world, we always wonder, you know, morally they're bankrupt. But the public has a big ability to take them back. I give two examples. Sharp James in New Jersey, in Newark versus Cory Booker. The local populace hated Booker. They wanted Sharp James back. Same thing in Washington, Marion Barry versus Adrian Fenton. So we don't know, you know, where they're coming from. In my district, I have Charles Rangel. I had people knocking on my door for weeks about Waldron and what a thief Charles Rangel was. And a guy in the next apartment said, basically, Charles Rangel's my thief. I trust him. Get this guy out of here. He's a carpetbagger. So, you know, we have that situation. My question is this. What about gentrification in a lot of these ethnic neighborhoods where we've had traditionally ethnic representation? For example, in my district, we have a councilman, Mark Levine, who has big eyes and big goals, and he took over a seat that was traditionally held by an African American. We also have a situation in a lot of other ethnic neighborhoods where there's a lot of change. So how does that going to affect some of the races? And are there any particular races you see that may change hands out of a traditionally ethnic representation to a gentrifier?
Yeah, I think in the Chinatown district, that is the hottest issue of this election. Gentrification is a big problem, and also in the past few years, the grassroots organizations are trying to push this Chinatown rezoning plan, which they kind of like spent years on, and then voted, and involved all different stakeholders in Chinatown. So they got this plan. They tried to present it to the mayor, to the city government, but the city has been saying, "Oh no, this is too aggressive. It's not realistic, so we're not going to do it." But of course, the really focus of the whole fight is the council member, because any rezoning plan has to start with this person. Depends on which side she stands on. So basically, so far, Margaret Chan has been standing with the mayor. So until very recently, as I mentioned just now, Margaret Chan doesn't really care about this race. She thought she is 100% guaranteed to get the re-election. So she didn't really reply to the complaints on such things. Whenever the grassroots people hold protests or complaining against her, she always be like, "No, I don't even want to say anything, because those are all nonsense." Until recently, because she started to feel nervous because all the other three candidates are sided with the grassroots people. So they're all against her. And she, I think a few weeks ago, she sent out a press release explaining what happened to the, there are a few high-rise buildings were either planned or has been building along the East River. That's a lot of community people are against that. So now she started to explain. She said, "Oh, that's because the urban renewal area, that whole area, was expired. So the building was able to be planted there. But that happened before I took the office." Mm-hmm. So you can see her attitude has changed, and she realized this is a big issue for her.
To quickly answer part of your question, I just scrolled through. We have this post at Gotham Gazette we put up a while back of who's running in every district, and we update it every couple of weeks. And I just sort of scrolled through the open seats, and it actually doesn't look right now like any of those open seats will see someone replaced by a different race or ethnicity. Gender, yes, as I mentioned before, but race, ethnicity looks like that actually there won't be much shift unless certain incumbents maybe lose or something like that. But in the open seats, I don't see that.
Interesting, interesting. There were a couple more hands before we go. Yes, you. Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
So we talked about, you guys talked about low voter turnout, and that even last time when there was a very hotly contested mayoral race, it still low. So it's going to be even lower now, we presume, right? But I'm just curious, and I realize this is sort of water under the bridge, but I just love to know, why do you guys think there is no opposition to de Blasio? What happened there?
I think he's got the union sewed up. You know, he negotiated very early on in his mayoral term, the union contracts that had been left unsettled for so long, and that the unions really provide the bodies, really. And so I think they showed their loyalty back to him by endorsing him early and standing behind him. And I think that he did not feel like, if he got them, he didn't have to worry about too much else. And it's just, you talk about voter turnout, and it's something that we've got to take a look at, because we do not make voting easy at all here in New York State. You realize the 1953 mayoral election, 93% of New Yorkers voted. 93% of registered New Yorkers voted. When Giuliani opposed David Dinkins in 1993, 52% of New York registered voters voted. How many, 20 years later, how many registered New Yorkers voted in the general election? 22%. That's more than half 20 years ago. I mean, I'd be very interested to see what this is going to be like this time around. And it's because I think mayoral candidates, they have figured out how to, de Blasio has figured out how to win with the people who he knows are going to vote, and it's being driven by the unions. And that's what he did, a smart political move by giving them what they wanted.
I have a theory that one of the unintended consequences of term limits, which were, an important reform, at least when they were enacted, is that, in effect, most candidates for city office feel like they get one 8-year term. So that to wonder why somebody like a Tish James or a Scott Stringer doesn't drop what they're doing and try and challenge the mayor, or an Eric Adams, or any of the borough presidents. I think 4 of the 5 want to be mayor. They're thinking, well, why should I cut my 8-year term in half? So.
I want to add. Go ahead, please. No, please.
Also, I think the real estate. Even though we have a progressive mayor, look, every single empty lot, somebody's building something, and it's not affordable housing. So that also he played with the people, but he also had the backing of the big bucks, people who have money, which is developers and real estate. And that's the reality, and we need to report on that. Most people don't know. I live in Hell's Kitchen. When I moved there in 1975, no one wanted to live in 11th Avenue. Today, there is not a vacant lot. The construction 11th Avenue is just incredible. Now, 1,100 new apartments, and like in 5 blocks, no new school, no new transportation, no new hospital. So where are all these people? What are we going to do? This is the lack of planning in the city. This is the issue that we have to look at. Where are we going to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now? And it's, so everybody's, I'm saying, we're going to 13th Avenue, to the Hudson? Is that where we're going? So these are critical issues. This is what we have to look. So part of that is, I haven't seen no stopping in development, and this new rezoning is very dangerous to us.
So I think what Errol said is absolutely right in terms of why the mayor doesn't have stronger opposition, but it's not only that combination, but it's a combination of the fact that people only get 2 terms, and why give it up, and just the luck of the calendar, that sort of the way term limits broke down, and there were so many open seats in 2013, you have very few people who are term limited out that would be legitimate challengers this year, and that's sort of a little bit of the luck of the draw for the mayor. The other thing I want to add on this is that he's followed through with a lot of what he said he would do, and I think it's important for us to recognize that, as much as I don't know, 80 or 90% of the stories that my publication writes about the mayor are sort of critical of him, he still is doing a lot of the things that he said he would do. And I think, therefore, the unrest among Democrats is not that strong.
No, that's right. I would say his policies are more popular than he is. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
you know.
the most negative things about this mayor are things that people don't really care about that much when it comes to like motivating issues to go vote, right? He's condescending. He goes to the gym when he shouldn't. You know, he talks bad about the press. You know, some of these things, the budget has probably grown too fast, but find me how many voters are going to go vote based on that.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Last couple of questions, and then we'll be done. Well, it's a good point. It's very expensive. I mean, you know, New York One is supposed to be sponsoring one of the debates, or we're doing at least one of the debates. And so we are waiting, and I'm kind of rooting for Bob Ganji and or Sal Albanese to raise at least $175,000, because that's the opening ante if you want to be in the formal campaign finance program at the citywide level. If they don't make it, then we don't have a formal debate. I don't know if the mayor would agree to do it anyway. I suspect probably not. I've got half my summer kind of just sitting around waiting, hoping for this. But, you know, it's very expensive. It's very expensive. Council races are expensive. There's a whole other sort of side question that we didn't get to, but, you know, how little is too little? You know, if you're covering a race and you look at somebody's campaign finance filings and they've raised all of, you know, $1,300, and they're purporting to go out and talk to tens of thousands of people, at a minimum, there's a valid question about how do you plan to do this, you know? And, you know, the related question is, if you can't do that, why should I take you seriously, and why should, frankly, voters take you seriously as a candidate? You know, and there are a lot of perfectly good, valid, legal reasons to run for office that don't include actually having a chance to win. But voters need to know that as much as they need to know everything else. This will be our last.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious if, thinking about like other non-Republican, non-Democrat parties is something that is coming up for anyone, just because like, you know, just like the way that like parties like the Green Party have really built in a way in our election system, and like, but there are some like more socialist candidates popping up over the last couple of years. I don't know if any of them are running for president, but just like, you know, especially if those candidates aren't actually like making as much money as some of those pretenders, like, are you thinking about ways to talk about that issue or talk about
Rent is too damn high party.
I mean, the thing is that the Democratic Party has a stranglehold on city politics, and unlike many other major city in America, New York City still does not have this open primary, where all candidates can run regardless of party. I mean, LA has it, Chicago has it, Boston has it, Washington, D.C. has it. They all have it. We do not have it. We still have to go through the Democratic Party or through the Republican Party. It hurts the smaller parties, but it also hurts on all the other unaffiliated voters. I mean, there's nearly 32% of New Yorkers are unaffiliated with any party. It's a phenomenon, and they cannot vote in what is the most determinative election in New York City. Think about this. Bill de Blasio won with 220,000 votes from the Democrats, from Democratic voters in the Democratic Party primary. That was the most determinative election. 220,000 people in a city of 8.5 million. That's why he became mayor. It's a very, very small percentage of New Yorkers. We need to open up the election system and allow more voters to vote and more candidates to run, and we'll have a much more competitive election system and I think a better city.
Okay, that is going to be the last word. Please join me in